2 weeks after the proposal, I faked losing my job. My fiancée went cold in 3 days. Said she needed emotional space. At 6 p.m., I sent her my real pay stub. Then blocked her. 2 minutes later, she was at my door. I watched from the camera. Didn't answer. So there I was, 32 years old, and thinking I had life figured out. My name's Jake, and I'd been dating Chloe for 3 years. She was this gorgeous marketing executive who drove a BMW and had opinions about wine that made waiters nervous. We lived in separate apartments but spent most nights together, and honestly, I thought we were solid. The proposal happened at this fancy restaurant downtown. I'd saved up for months to buy the ring, some 2-carat diamond that cost more than my car. Chloe said yes, tears in her eyes, the whole romantic scene. Her friends went crazy on Instagram, posting pictures of the ring from every angle possible. My buddy Miles said I looked happier than he'd ever seen me. But here's the thing about happiness. Sometimes it makes you stupid. Sometimes it makes you miss the little signs that something isn't quite right. Like how Chloe always asked about my work bonus before asking about my day. Or how she'd gotten weird about splitting restaurant bills lately, always letting me pay. Or how she'd started mentioning her coworker Brad's new Tesla a lot more than seemed normal. 2 weeks after the proposal, I was sitting in my office at the software company where I worked as a senior developer. The job paid well, around $90,000 a year plus bonuses. Nothing crazy, but comfortable. I was scrolling through our wedding venue options when this wild idea hit me. What if I tested something? What if I found out whether Chloe loved me or just loved the financial security I represented? The plan was simple but risky. I'd tell her I lost my job. Not permanently, just a fake layoff story. I'd see how she reacted, how she treated me when she thought the money was gone. Then after a few days, I'd reveal the truth and we'd laugh about her momentary panic. Easy test, quick results, relationship validated. Looking back, I realize how naive that sounds. But at the time, I was convinced Chloe would pass with flying colors. I mean, she'd agreed to marry me, right? She'd stick by me through a temporary setback. She'd probably even offer to help financially while I looked for something new. That's what people who love you do. I spent the rest of that afternoon crafting my story. Company downsizing, budget cuts, last hired, first fired. All the usual corporate nonsense that actually happens to people every day. I even looked up some unemployment benefit information to make it convincing. The whole thing felt like preparing for a play where I was the only actor who knew it was fiction. That evening, I went to Chloe's apartment with takeout from her favorite Thai place. She was on her laptop, probably working on some campaign for organic dog food or artisanal soap. When I walked in, she barely looked up, just gestured toward the kitchen counter where I should put the food. The apartment was exactly what you'd expect from someone making 6 figures in marketing. Minimalist furniture that cost more than it looked like it should, abstract art that meant nothing to anyone, and enough throw pillows to stock a small boutique. Everything was white or gray or that weird beige color that interior designers call sophisticated. We ate dinner while she talked about office drama involving her boss and some client who wanted to change their entire brand strategy after the campaign was already running. I nodded and made appropriate responses, but my mind was racing with what I was about to do. The fake story felt heavier in my chest with every passing minute. After dinner, she finally closed the laptop and curled up next to me on the couch. This was my moment. I took a deep breath and told her about my terrible day at work. How they'd called me into a conference room with HR. How they'd explained about budget cuts and restructuring. How my entire department was being eliminated. Her reaction was interesting. First came the shock, which seemed genuine enough. Her eyes went wide, and she put her hand over her mouth. But then something shifted. Instead of immediately asking if I was okay or offering support, she started asking practical questions. How much severance was I getting? When exactly would my health insurance run out? Had I already started looking for new positions? The questions weren't wrong, necessarily. They were logical things to wonder about. But there was something cold in the way she asked them, like she was conducting a business assessment rather than comforting her fiancé. When I told her the severance was pretty minimal and I wasn't sure how long the job hunt might take, she got quiet in a way that made my stomach twist. We watched some Netflix show after that, but I could feel her mind working beside me. She kept checking her phone, and when she thought I wasn't looking, I caught her scrolling through LinkedIn. Not looking at job postings for me, looking at her own connections. Like she was already mentally preparing for a different future. That night, she said she was tired and needed to get some sleep for an early meeting. Usually, I'd stay over, but she mentioned something about having to wake up super early and not wanting to disturb me. It was the first time in months she'd basically asked me to leave. Walking back to my car, I felt this weird mix of vindication and dread. Part of me was satisfied that my instincts had been right. Something was off about how she'd reacted. But a bigger part was starting to realize that maybe I'd opened a door I wasn't prepared to walk through. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Chloe. It was short and formal, asking if I wanted to grab coffee later to talk about our situation. Our situation. Not my job loss. Not how we'd get through this together, but our situation. Like losing my job had somehow become a problem with our relationship rather than just a temporary setback for me. The coffee meeting was worse than I'd expected. Chloe showed up 20 minutes late, which never happened when we had good news to discuss. She ordered a small coffee instead of her usual large latte with extra foam, and she kept her sunglasses on even though we were sitting inside. Classic avoidance behavior. She started with this speech about how she'd been thinking all night about our future, how she wanted to be supportive but also realistic about what unemployment might mean for our timeline. The wedding was still 8 months away, and venues required deposits, and her dress was already ordered, and didn't I think it might be wise to postpone until I was back on my feet financially? The way she said it made my blood run cold. Not because postponing a wedding was necessarily unreasonable, but because of how quickly she'd gotten there. Less than 24 hours after hearing about my job loss, she was already restructuring our entire future. She wasn't asking how she could help or what we could figure out together. She was presenting me with a revised plan that protected her interests. I told her I understood her concerns, but that I had savings and confidence I'd find something quickly. The tech market was good, I had solid experience, and this kind of thing happened to everyone at some point. But she just nodded in this patronizing way, like I was being naive about my own industry. Then she dropped the real bomb. She'd been thinking that maybe we should take a step back from spending so much time together while I focused on job hunting. She didn't want to be a distraction, and she had some big projects at work that needed her full attention. It would be better for both of us if we gave each other some space to handle our respective responsibilities. Space. That word that every person in a relationship learns to fear. Not a break, not a breakup, just space. The kind of space that lets someone ease out of a commitment without having to explicitly end it. The kind of space that keeps all options open while slowly closing the most important door. I agreed to the space thing because what else could I do? Fighting it would have made me look desperate and clingy. But walking away from that coffee shop, I felt like I was watching my entire life reorganize itself around a lie I'd told. The fake job loss was revealing real problems, but now I was trapped inside the deception. Over the next 2 days, the space Chloe had requested became a canyon. She stopped texting me good morning and good night. She didn't ask how the job search was going. When I tried to call her, she'd answer but sound distracted, like she was multitasking through our conversations. Every interaction felt like she was slowly backing away from a fire. But here's where things got really weird. On the 3rd day, I was grabbing lunch near her office building when I saw her walking out with that coworker Brad she'd mentioned so much. The same Brad with the new Tesla. They weren't just walking together, they were walking together. His hand was on her back, guiding her toward his car, and she was laughing at something he'd said in a way that looked way too familiar. I followed them. I know how that sounds, but I had to see where this was going. They drove to this upscale bistro across town, the kind of place Chloe and I used to go for special occasions. Through the window, I watched them sit at a corner table, leaning in close to each other, her hand touching his arm while they talked. The realization hit me like a truck. This wasn't about my fake job loss at all. Chloe had been looking for an exit strategy from our relationship, and my unemployment story had just given her the perfect excuse. She was already moving on to someone with better financial prospects, someone who could maintain the lifestyle she wanted without any of the uncertainty that came with being engaged to a temporarily unemployed software developer. But the really mind-blowing part came when I got home and checked my security camera footage from the past few days. I'd installed the system a few months earlier after some break-ins in the neighborhood, and it recorded everyone who came to my front door. What I saw made my fake job loss seem like the least important deception in this whole situation. Tuesday night, the day after our coffee meeting, Chloe had come to my apartment. But instead of knocking, she'd used her key to let herself in. The timestamp showed she'd stayed for almost 2 hours while I was out at a movie with Miles. She'd gone through my place looking for something, opening drawers and checking my desk, where I kept important papers. Wednesday, she'd come back again. This time she'd brought someone with her, a guy I didn't recognize who looked like he knew what he was doing with locks and security systems. They'd spent an hour in my apartment, and when they left, the guy was carrying my laptop bag. My laptop. The one with all my work files, personal documents, and about 3 years' worth of photos and videos of Chloe and me together. She'd stolen my computer while pretending to need emotional space from our relationship. But why would she want my laptop? What was she looking for, or what was she trying to hide? That's when the detective part of my brain finally kicked in. I started thinking about all the little things that hadn't made sense over the past few months. How Chloe always wanted to use her own laptop when we were together, never letting me borrow it even for simple things like checking email. How she'd gotten weird about leaving her phone unattended around me. how she'd started working late more often but never seemed stressed about deadlines the way people usually do when they're actually overworked. I realized I didn't know Chloe as well as I thought I did. The woman I'd proposed to had secrets big enough to make her steal my computer and stage an elaborate exit from our relationship over a fake job loss. Whatever she was hiding, my unemployment story had scared her into thinking I might discover it. The next morning, I called in sick to work and dedicated the day to figuring out what Chloe was really up to. First stop was the building management office for her apartment complex. I told them I was her fiancé and needed to get something from her place for an emergency, but I'd lost my copy of her key. The building manager was this older guy named Frank who'd seen me coming and going for months, so he believed my story and let me in. Chloe's apartment looked different when I was there alone, searching instead of just visiting. I went through her desk, looking for anything that might explain why she'd stolen my laptop. What I found was a folder full of printouts from various dating websites and social media profiles. Not just current stuff, profiles going back 2 years, right in the middle of our relationship. But these weren't profiles for Chloe Martinez, the marketing executive I was engaged to. These were profiles for Chloe Stevens, a freelance consultant who was apparently single and looking for serious relationships with financially stable men. The photos were recent, including some I'd taken of her just a few months ago during a weekend trip we'd taken to the mountains. The dating profiles were bad enough, but then I found her real laptop hidden in the bedroom closet behind some storage boxes. When I opened it, the browser history told a story that made my fake job loss look like a harmless prank. She'd been running what amounted to a romance scam operation, maintaining relationships with at least 6 different men across 3 different cities. Each guy had a different version of Chloe. To Michael in Denver, she was a struggling artist who needed help with rent. To Robert in Phoenix, she was a graduate student working on her MBA who could use some financial support for school. To David in Seattle, she was a single mother whose ex-husband had stopped paying child support. Every story was carefully crafted to extract maximum financial sympathy while maintaining plausible deniability. The really sophisticated part was how she'd been managing the logistics. She had separate phones for each relationship, separate social media accounts, and even separate bank accounts where the money was deposited. She'd been traveling for work more often lately, but now I realized she'd been visiting these other guys, maintaining the relationships in person to keep them hooked. My laptop had probably contained evidence of her real identity and our relationship. Photos with timestamps, emails with her real name, maybe even some financial records if she'd ever used my computer for anything important. She'd stolen it to eliminate proof that the woman these other men thought was single and available was actually engaged to someone else. But the most shocking discovery was in her financial records. She'd been making more money from these fake relationships than from her actual job at the marketing agency. The bank statements showed regular deposits from all 6 men, usually in amounts between $500 and $2,000. She was pulling in an extra $8,000 to $10,000 every month from this operation. The woman I'd fallen in love with was basically a professional con artist who'd gotten so good at her scam that she'd maintained it even while planning to marry me. My fake job loss had probably scared her into thinking I might get desperate enough to look closely at her finances, which would have exposed everything. While I was processing this information, her real phone started buzzing with text messages. I grabbed it and saw messages from Brad, the coworker I'd seen her with at lunch. But he wasn't just a coworker. He was her partner in the scam operation. The messages were about which guys to focus on this week and how to handle Michael in Denver, who was apparently getting suspicious about some inconsistencies in Chloe's story. Brad had been helping her manage the fake identities, probably taking photos for the dating profiles and maybe even impersonating male friends or family members when needed. They'd turned romance fraud into a 2-person business, and they were making serious money doing it. That's when I heard keys in the front door. Chloe was coming home early, probably to check whether I'd tried to contact her or come by the apartment. I grabbed my phone, took photos of everything I could, and climbed out onto the fire escape just as she walked into the bedroom. From outside the window, I watched her go straight to the closet and check her hidden laptop. When she saw it had been moved, her face went completely white. She started frantically looking through her desk drawers, checking to see what else might have been discovered. Then she called Brad, speaking in hushed, panicked tones about how someone had been in her apartment and found the laptop. The conversation I overheard through the window was the final piece of the puzzle. They weren't just planning to end things with me because of the fake job loss. They were planning to disappear entirely. Brad had already started moving money out of the various bank accounts into offshore accounts they'd set up. They were going to liquidate the whole operation and relocate to a different state where they could start over with new identities. My fake unemployment had accidentally accelerated their timeline, but they'd been planning this exit strategy for months. The engagement ring I'd bought was probably going to be sold to help fund their escape. The woman I'd planned to marry was about to vanish along with the money she'd stolen from multiple men who thought they were in genuine relationships with her. But here's the crazy part. While I was listening to this conversation, I realized that my fake job loss had actually saved me from something much worse. If I hadn't tested Chloe's reaction, I might have married her without ever discovering what she really was. I might have been legally tied to a woman who was running federal fraud charges worth of criminal activity. Instead of confronting Chloe directly, I decided to let my fake job loss play out to its logical conclusion while I gathered more evidence. I spent the next day documenting everything I discovered, taking screenshots of the dating profiles, photographing the bank statements, and even recording a video message explaining what I'd found in case something happened to me. Then I did something that felt both brilliant and completely insane. I created my own fake identity and contacted one of Chloe's marks. I reached out to Michael in Denver, the guy who was getting suspicious, and told him I was a private investigator who'd been hired by another victim of the same scam. I shared enough details to convince him I was legitimate and asked him to meet me via video call. Michael turned out to be this decent guy in his 40s who worked in construction and had lost his wife to cancer 2 years earlier. He'd been sending Chloe money because he thought she was a struggling artist who reminded him of his late wife's creative spirit. When I showed him the real photos of Chloe with me, along with evidence of her other fake relationships, he nearly cried. But Michael wasn't just a victim. He was also smart and angry enough to want revenge. He'd been keeping detailed records of every transaction, every conversation, every promise Chloe had made about paying him back once her art career took off. He had enough documentation to support criminal charges for fraud, identity theft, and probably a dozen other federal crimes. Together, we contacted the other men Chloe had been scamming. Robert in Phoenix was a retired teacher who'd been sending money for her fake MBA program. David in Seattle was a divorced engineer who thought he was helping a single mother pay for childcare. Each of them had been carefully selected and manipulated based on psychological profiles Chloe and Brad had developed. The 6 of us formed this weird support group of victims who were determined to make sure Chloe and Brad faced consequences for what they'd done. We compiled all our evidence into a comprehensive file and contacted both the FBI and the local police departments in all the cities where they'd been operating. But I wanted to confront Chloe myself before the authorities got involved. I wanted her to know that her fake fiancé had discovered her real crimes. So I planned one final scene in our relationship drama, something that would give me the closure I needed while also protecting the evidence we'd gathered. On Friday evening, exactly a week after I'd told her about my fake job loss, I sent Chloe a text asking if we could meet for dinner to discuss our future. She agreed, probably thinking she could manipulate me into accepting the breakup gracefully while she and Brad finalized their escape plans. We met at the same restaurant where I'd proposed to her 3 weeks earlier. She showed up looking nervous, but trying to play the role of the supportive ex-fiancé who just couldn't handle the stress of financial uncertainty. She'd prepared this whole speech about how she'd always care about me, but needed to prioritize her own emotional well-being during this difficult transition. I let her finish the speech, nodding sympathetically while she explained why our relationship couldn't survive my unemployment and how she hoped we could remain friends. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out copies of her dating profiles, bank statements, and text messages with Brad. The look on her face when she realized what I was holding was worth every minute of the past week's detective work. The fake sympathy disappeared, replaced by pure panic as she understood that her entire operation had been exposed. She tried to grab the papers, but I'd made multiple copies and given them to Michael and the other victims for safekeeping. Then I told her about my real job, the one I'd never actually lost. I explained how her reaction to my fake unemployment had revealed what kind of person she really was, and how that discovery had led me to investigate her other activities. I let her know that 6 men across 3 states now knew they'd been scammed, and that federal agents would probably be contacting her within the next few days. Chloe's response was to immediately throw Brad under the bus, claiming he'd manipulated her into the scam operation and that she'd been trying to find a way out when I proposed. She said she'd only stayed engaged to me because she thought marriage might give her legal protection from the consequences of what Brad had forced her to do. But I'd heard her phone conversation with Brad, and I knew she was the mastermind behind the whole operation. She was still lying, still trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage, even when caught red-handed with overwhelming evidence. The woman I'd thought I loved had never actually existed. She was just another fake identity Chloe had created to serve her purposes. The dinner ended with her storming out of the restaurant, probably to warn Brad that their operation had been compromised. But it was too late for them to disappear cleanly. The evidence had already been submitted to law enforcement, and the victims were working with prosecutors to make sure charges were filed in multiple jurisdictions. That night, I went home and sent Chloe one final message, not to her phone, but to her real email address that I'd found in her laptop. I attached my real pay stub showing my actual salary and employment status, along with a note explaining that I'd blocked her on all platforms and would only communicate through lawyers going forward. 2 minutes after I hit send, my security camera showed Chloe at my front door, frantically ringing the doorbell and pounding on the door. She stayed there for almost an hour, alternating between begging me to let her explain and screaming threats about what she'd do if I didn't answer. I watched the whole thing from my living room, feeling a mix of satisfaction and disgust as I saw her real personality finally emerge without any fake charm to hide behind. The next morning, I found out that Brad had been arrested trying to board a flight to Mexico with fake identification and a suitcase full of cash. Chloe had apparently fled to her parents' house in another state, but federal marshals picked her up there within 24 hours. The romance scam operation that had been running for over 2 years was finally shut down. The legal proceedings took months to resolve, but eventually, Chloe and Brad were both convicted on multiple federal charges, including wire fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. Chloe got 7 years in federal prison, while Brad got 5 years for his role as an accomplice. They were also ordered to pay restitution to all their victims, though most of the money they'd stolen was never recovered. The 6 men they'd scammed, including me in a weird way, stayed in touch throughout the legal process. We formed this unlikely friendship based on shared experience with professional manipulation. Michael from Denver actually visited me a few months after the trial, and we've become genuine friends despite the strange circumstances of how we met. My real job continued without any drama, and I got promoted to team lead 6 months after the whole fake unemployment test revealed my ex-fiancée's criminal enterprise. My boss never knew how close I'd come to accidentally destroying my career with a relationship test that seemed harmless at the time. I kept the engagement ring for a while, unsure what to do with it. Eventually, I sold it and donated the money to an organization that helps victims of romance scams. It seemed like the right way to get something positive out of the whole mess. Looking back, I realize how lucky I was that my stupid fake job loss test revealed the truth before I married someone who was essentially a stranger wearing a convincing mask. If I'd been honest about my employment situation, I might have spent years married to a woman who was actively committing federal crimes while planning her escape strategy. The weirdest part is that I actually learned something valuable about relationships from the whole experience. Not that you should test your partner with elaborate deceptions, but that financial stress can reveal fundamental incompatibilities that might otherwise stay hidden until much more serious problems develop. These days, I'm dating someone named Lily who works as a social worker and drives a 10-year-old Honda. When I told her about my previous relationship disaster, she laughed and said that if I ever faked losing my job to test her reaction, she'd probably offer to help me update my resume and then cook dinner while I applied for new positions. That's when I knew I'd found someone whose values actually aligned with mine. The fake job loss was stupid, but it accidentally saved me from marrying a sociopath who would have eventually destroyed my life in ways I never could have imagined. Sometimes the most ridiculous plans reveal the most important truths. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.